I do. All right, and we're recording. Do you want to get us started, Tom?
Sure thing. So, hi, this is the Comet Sprint 2 demo. I think that the place to start is maybe just to recap what we set out to do. And I'm going to go ahead and queue up our staging site. So the first goal of this sprint was to get staging and production deployments up for Comet. And our goal really was to be able to do that at both campuses. I'll say a little bit about some hiccups that we had along the way, but we'll report some successes there. And a second goal was to configure the object storage backend. So the actual deposited Comet objects should go into, and the files, that is, should go into S3 or an S3 compatible object store. And we wanted to do that for AWS's S3 service, which I'll demo, as well as a locally hosted S3 compatible object store that could run over on-premises disks. So that's the configuration that UCSD is going to roll out, I think. I won't speak to the operational decisions there, but the feeling is that we want to be able to use both cloud services as well as on-premises disk. So we've configured both of those things. I'll probably only demo the cloud services, but we are testing the on-premises disks actively with new with the review deploys. And I think shortly the staging and production UCSD deploys will point at stable deployments of that as well. So that's a second goal. A third goal that we set a lot of goals this time, and I think that we'll probably be a little bit more specific about and narrowly focused about our goals for the next sprint. But a third goal was to configure user authentication. So we want to use Google Auth services. And then last but not least, we wanted to make progress on ARC identifier minting. So I'm going to show talk about where we are with each of those things. And then if there are other things that people want to demo, or I know that we had IIIF conversations, so we can talk a little bit at the end about anything else that got done, that got checked off this sprint. Okay, so I'm going to try and share my screen. Desktop 2. Is this visible and at a reasonable size?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so fantastic news, first of all, on the production and staging deployment front. This is a staging deploy on UCSB's cloud infrastructure. This is a prod deploy. It's behind a few commits. You can see there's a share your work button here that we merged work this morning to configure out of existence. But these two deploys are running continuously. So every time we complete work, they roll out automatically. And these are both running on UCSB's infrastructure. There were some hiccups on the UCSD infrastructure side, and Ron and Thor pulled some heroics to put that system back up, but it's put us, I think, maybe half a day behind on getting those deployments up and running. Thor, can you comment on where that is at the moment?
Yeah, we're getting the deploys into the new prod, both stage and prod, but they were failing originally on our RWX stuff because the Longhorn stuff, that's fixed. I'm not sure, everything else is coming up, but there's some DB layer. I think it's volume related, but I should sort it out today.
Okay, so we're still optimistic about being able to check this off and have continuous deployment for staging and prod going forward. And yeah, that's very good. I think from now on, now that these are up, we'll be doing these demos from one or the other of our staging sites. The data in those staging sites should be vaguely persistent. We won't make any guarantees about them staying up. I'm gonna log out here because we can show, so this, you'll notice that if you watched last week or last sprint's demo, that this is a very different user interface for the login. And that's because we have moved the login from the system that rolls out with Hyrex by default to one that we can configure to run over Google Auth. These deployments right now are still running with the developer mode. On the UCSB side, we ran into some permissions issues in Google Cloud that we're working with the IT ops crowd on our side to smooth over. On the UCSD side, I think that when your staging comes up, we do expect Google Auth to be turned on more or less from the start. Is that right?
Yep, that's the target for today. Great.
So I think that UCSB's Google Auth configuration is going to take at least another couple of days. It's sort of stuck in back and forth between the library and the campus IT at the moment. And there's a little bit of a game of telephone going on around that. But at this point, the code work is done to do this. And we are pretty well practiced at deploying this particular configuration for Google Auth, because this is the same setup that we've done in the past for Starlight, the Spotlight exhibits. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. At this point, if you are a user of this staging site, you can just log in as anything. So you can put any name and any email here. And the old rule from last week still applies. If I name that user Comet, if I make the email cometadmin@library.ucsb or library.ucsd.edu, then you will have admin access. Otherwise you won't, and you probably won't be able to do much without admin access because ACLs are still in progress. So you won't see like deposited objects if you're not a super user. Okay, so here is the Comet front end. We removed that share your work button because this isn't a self-deposit app. And I didn't want to have to explain to people again that that will go away. So Gabriella, I'm curious whether we want to make the dashboard the default page here, this dashboard. That might be a thing to talk about. So 2 registered users, 4 published works. This is a pretty new staging deployment as of like last night or this morning. But I think it will be the stable one from here. And I'm just going to go through the add your work process again. We'll name this Comet in Moominland, which Comet in Moominland is a book that I often use as an example, and it's just coincidence that it's got Comet in the name. I'm going to deposit a fixture object, and the deposit agreement still exists. I'll save it. So at this point, we should see, so this was me a few minutes ago. And I think if we refresh our staging objects here, we'll see another one appeared. I'm not sure that I can demo downloading this object from S3 because this is a private bucket and I don't have local auth configured. It's also true that at this point, the UI still isn't showing this object as deposited. I think that this is just a permissions issue, and there's some work in progress to get this showing. I think that we'll be able to do through the UI download of this with a few minor changes, but that's not there yet. So yeah, that was deposit to the cloud. You'll see that that's now-ish. Yeah, that's a minute and a half ago now. And I think, yeah, if I click this, I'll get something like, yeah, access denied, which is a friendly S3 message. If I had the access key that the Comet system has, then I would have access to this object.
Can I interrupt, Tom?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the view that you're showing the S3, that I assume that the library staff won't have that view, right?
That's right. That's just to show that this is depositing into the Amazon cloud.
Okay.
And on the UCSD side, there will be no view like this, just because the objects won't be going into Amazon. I'm not sure if we're in a position where somebody could share their screen and show a Minio. That might be a fun thing to do at some point, but it might be out of this demo. That is to say, there's another backend that we're supporting for this object deposit.
Are you planning on having the interface for quote unquote sort of S3 be different than Minio?
Oh no, on the Comet side, on the application side, they'll be the same.
Okay.
This is just
yes.
This is
Got
just
it.
the Amazon
Yes,
interface.
yes. All right. Yes.
There's a
got it.
different UI that Minio provides.
Yeah.
That
I
you
can
can use to look at this without the application layer at all.
If we want to do something on that, I can certainly show what our Minio looks like.
Yeah.
At some future date.
What's
or
that?
if we want to do it now. We can do it now, or I can do it another time. But I
do you want to queue it up and let us know when you're ready?
Yep.
I think that would actually be kind of useful. And then let's see. We've talked about user authentication. We've talked about file deposit. The last thing that we had in scope for this sprint was ARC minting, and specifically we're still having conversations about when in the object lifecycle it's appropriate to mint ARCs. We think that this will be dependent on individual workflow settings, which is still sort of a largish discussion to have. But for that reason, we've sort of deferred on actually making this mint an ARC. There's work in progress for the Easy ID interactions that so essentially work to have the Comet system go out and mint an arc at EasyID, then assign that arc to a specific object, and then maintain its metadata in the upstream EasyID service. That's still work in progress. I think it's possible that will get closed today, but I think the reality is that we'll be continuing to do arc work next sprint. And so that's the set of work that we scoped out. The last thing I'll say is that we set an explicit goal this sprint for all of the team members to close a ticket. And I think we maybe succeeded at that. I think we did. I think there might be one person who's not assigned to any ticket that got closed, but I think that's maybe not reflective of how the work actually got done. So I do think that everybody was responsible for a closed ticket this sprint.
All right, I have a menu page up.
Okay, great. I'm going to drop screen share if I can figure out how to. Oh goodness. Zoom.
Whoever owns this may need to give me sharing.
Okay.
The interface right here is sort of analogous to, can everybody see that? Yes?
Yeah.
So this is analogous to the S3 bucket kind of thing that was there. Like it basically is a file system. This is the one that runs for our Starlight installation. And this front end is representing the same kind of storage that you were seeing in Tom's web interface. It's basically a file system that you can access using the S3 protocol. So things like that, these are where the uploads are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's, so and this presents to the application exactly like Amazon does, and Amazon Bucket does, with the key authentication access and all that kind of stuff. So the nice thing about this is that underlying this is our Cumulo on campus. So it lets us essentially abstract our hard drive, our big Cumulo with petabytes of space on it, and show that as if it was an S3 bucket, so that we don't have to have a different protocol like NFS or something like that. Does that make sense? And these are it's just files and stuff. But you can see how it looks kind of the same, it's just a slightly different interface. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah. So this is the interface that we deploy with the sort of throwaway applications as well.
Right.
So we're testing this on an ongoing basis. I don't see a Comet in this yet, just because we're not, right? Like your buckets don't include Comet buckets.
Oh, well,
yet.
our minios, we don't put all of our buckets in a single minio. We have a different minio for each bucket. So I didn't log into that because it's empty. So, yeah. So we have like 6 or 7 minios, and we have a separate one for Comet. I didn't go there because it was empty. But.
Great.
Yeah, and that's also nice that it's analogous, because we can spin it up in the container, then the interface is going to look the same for both, test environments and review apps and things like that, as it does for when we're doing a production using an S3 bucket like this. Anyway, I will hand back control.
Yeah, that's great. Michael, I wonder if I can put you on the spot to debrief about the AAAF conversations that we've had. Is that fair, or if that makes you anxious, then I can go ahead and say something myself. Oh, you're muted, so maybe
or something's not working.
Maybe that's your excuse.
Nothing yet. You can hear us, I take it. No, yes, you can hear us. We have a hardware issue.
Since we're recording, I'll go ahead and
There we go. We got him.
Oh, we got him.
He's back. Yep.
Sorry, what I was trying to say before I turned into a robot or was muted was I'm happy to kind of state some stuff, although what I may say may kind of take us into next sprint too. But so I think part of what we were trying to do was a demo, I think, looking at deciding on an image server, decidedly, and what that would look like, and then also taking a peek at sort of how a manifest might be served or where that manifest might be served. And so I think we had some fantastic conversations with some folks at UCLA and decided on looking at and using their Helm charts for Cantaloupe, deciding on that image server. And then Tom, did we want to at some point just show the manifest being served out from Comet to itself? Because that would be an excellent quick demo, and then we can kind of talk about what the future might be holding there for us.
This sprint. I'll share the screen again. Okay, so this is now, again, the staging system and the object that we've just deposited. I think that's a valid manifest. There's not much special to say about it yet, probably for the same reason that the objects aren't, that the file objects aren't showing up in the UI. They're not showing up here. That is, they're being filtered as not viewable by the current user. And then the other piece here that's missing is that this should point to a IIIF image server, which does not yet exist, which is what Michael was just talking about. So this is the manifest that Comet will consume. We're having conversations about what the public manifests are for external users are, and where those should get served from and how they should be authenticated and so on. But for the purposes of sort of an early stage goal of getting IIIF objects showing through the Comet UI, this is really the point that we expect that to come from. So yeah, and I think the conversations that we had about the IIIF image server with UCLA were very productive. Matt opened a bunch of tickets for the IIIF project, and I think that it's probable that even if we don't prioritize that work in the next sprint, which I think is more or less the decision that we've come to, that there will be some movement on the IIIF services side over the next couple of weeks. So that I'm going to pause here for any questions that, particularly if Gabriella has any, but then we can talk about what's coming up in the next sprint.
I don't have any questions at this time, but I will open it up to other people too, like Arwin, Chrissy. I don't know if Chrissy's still here, but this is looking great. This is, I think when I see things visually, it just helps me understand how much work is really accomplished in a short amount of time in 2 weeks. So great job, everybody.
All right, so I'm not hearing any questions, so I'm just going to shift right into what's next. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and re-share here because that will be helpful to ground this, I think. So our big theme for the next sprint is configurable metadata. So if I go back to, like, I'm going to add a work, we can see that so far, the only metadata that we have is this title. This is actually in some sense, work of its own that we're here, because by default, what we would have is a sort of rigid, but broad DCMI based metadata profile. And this form is generated from configuration that by default lives upstream in the Hyrax project. But what we'd like to do is have each campus be able to provide its own configurations for the metadata, and have the expectation, first of all, that when we deploy staging at UCSB or staging at UCSD, that we'll see forms, indexing behavior, these work views, and search all key off of metadata in configuration. So that's really our big goal for next sprint. The second large ticket in that work set is to be able to support multiple schemas per campus. So what we'd like to be able to do is have, in the case especially of like I guess there's a couple of different work types that we know are coming for us. On the one hand, I think at UCSD, we're looking at one big schema that maybe we want to be able to display different forms for, depending on context. But also we know that we have sort of different work types in the geospatial space where we want to be able to provide a configuration format that that metadata specialists can use to switch the behavior of the application around metadata. There's quite a large number of use cases and user stories around this space, but I think our initial scope is just to be able to show that given a metadata configuration format that we can document, that we'll see metadata display in this space, metadata display, behavior for the form, various search behavior. So I think we do have search for, oh, look, I've got more than one of them because I'm depositing multiple things with the same name. The search behavior, and then I think there's also a ticket in Sprint for controlled vocabulary picking. So that's also something that we want to see in the form where if a field is configured to have a controlled vocabulary, that you get appropriate selector behavior from the web form. So that's the big scope for the next sprint. I think we'll want to be able to report some kind of progress on the user auth side. I'm hoping that we'll demo some real campus auth next sprint, just because the large portion of the work there is done, and probably also we'll want to move some of the ARC minting stuff forward. Other than that, the work that I think we put in Sprint looks like conversations about workflow. I feel like there's one other big conversation that we agreed to have. Gabriella, can you refresh my memory?
Customizable metadata.
Oh yeah, there's some more like ongoing customizable metadata stuff.
I know we had 3 or 4. I'm going to pick up here on my notes. Access controls, workflow, IIIF, and customizable metadata are the 4 that I have listed here.
Yeah, that sounds, oh, the access controls is the one I was thinking of.
Mhm.
I think that's a big one that I'd like to actually just demo some badness, because why not? So at present, let's call this public, and we'll add a file. We'll make this one a PDF, deposit agreement, public. You can more or less ignore these visibility settings. I think this is a part of the conversation that we'd like to have. But I think if I deposit this as public, it comes through as private. So fixing some of that basic stuff, but also figuring out what the access control behavior that we want to present to users will look like is a big upcoming conversation. I think that's what I have to talk about. Is there more that we want to say, or should we call that a wrap?
I have a somewhat relevant question for Arwen. Tom, you heard him mention multiple schemas. Do you, and I'm not encouraging this, but do you anticipate or have you thought about having a separate schema for RDCP content?
Not as I understand we're defining schema.
So can Tom then define the schema when we're talking about Comet? Because I'm thinking of works. Okay, go ahead.
I think schema for Comet's purposes is pretty broadly defined. We're talking here about the kind of what the keys and value spaces are for object metadata, for file metadata, but also when we load a schema into Comet, that will include things like Comet's form behavior, Comet's indexing behavior, and related sort of application configuration. So when I say schema in this context, I mean both the schema as it in respect to the metadata itself, but then also the configuration for how the application talks to that schema. Is that a useful answer? I always fear that I'm explaining things like this at the wrong level of detail.
That sounds like what we discussed yesterday, was it? Yeah, and I mean, and so as Tom said before, I mean, we still, I think, will want to have one schema, as in all the properties and the rules about them and all of that. But I mean, when you get to the form function, that's when what Tom mentioned about some variations depending on context. So it could be that there's so I do see a different need for different like forms or certain of those kinds of functions between RDCP and DLDP, but it also could break down further than that. So really seeing kind of what those look like and going through them. But the base schema, as far as the properties themselves, I don't think that there's a lot of value in splitting off. I think there'd be a cost for.
Makes sense.
Okay. Do we think that's a wrap, Gabriella? Should we drop recording?
Yep, I will end it right now.